Hello, hi everybody. Thank you for joining the PMO Flash Mobs webinar. It's great to be here, and we're going to be talking about the top 10 things that the PMO are talking about right now. And essentially what we've got today, for some of you who may not know, is that it's actually International Project Management Day. Yeah, first Thursday every November, and we thought, well, actually, let the PMO take over. And so that's what we're going to do today. And what's interesting about the registration for today is I asked you to tell me about your challenges. And essentially what we've got here in front of you, what you're looking at now, I didn't like those word cloud things anymore, so I thought actually we'll go with something else, and this is a tree map. And I've just plonked everything in that that you said that was a challenge for you at the moment, and then essentially a tree map allows you to do this when you do some grouping. So what's really interesting about this webinar that we pulled together is actually we did it a couple of weeks ago because the group at Nokia wanted to listen to and find out what PMO Flashmob had been up to, which is why essentially this session came about. So I thought, well, rather than just having it for Nokia, I thought it'd be quite good to just share with the general PMO community for people that may or may not have been to Flashmob in the past, and just to share some of the things that people are obviously talking about. So, so these were your challenges that were grouped, and what's really freaky is that actually what people were talking about, the initial thing that I put together 2 weeks ago, it spookily matches your challenges, which to me says that PMO Flashmob is right on the button. So what we're going to be doing, top 10 things that PMO are talking about, and this is also to give people a flavour of the kind of things that PMO Flashmob gets involved in, what the community there are talking about, and give you some insights, and also there's quite a lot of pointers to go and have a look at some other stuff as well. So, you know, there's quite a lot of different types of things in here, and but hopefully something will grab you or float your boat. So, first one, PMO principles. Now, we started talking about this back at the Project Challenge show in London towards the end of October, and essentially this is a new booklet that PMO Flashmob star Eileen Roden has been involved in, and essentially PMO Principles, available on Kindle and Amazon, is essentially a small booklet that is about the 7 principles, 7 PMO principles, and essentially what it's about is about having driving or key driving principles for setting up, designing, setting up and managing a PMO. It's been pulled together by Eileen, Dr. Robert Jocelyn and Ralph Muller, part of the AI PMO, which is the Association for International PMOs. And essentially those guys have come up with a booklet that is all about, if we imagine that, we know that PMOs are different for each organization because the context in which the PMO is in, i.e. what that organization is doing, how it's set up, the culture and so on, is different for each organization. Therefore, a PMO cannot just be taken out of a box and set up and away you go. There's always going to be times when you need guiding principles in order to help you to manage, create, whatever, in terms of a PMO. So this particular thing that you're looking at the moment is about showing you that things stop being procedural based, that sometimes the services, the functions, the processes are not in place for a particular function or service that your PMO might be offering. And actually it falls back on something which might be a principle. Okay, so these 7 principles are here, that you can see. You can also see these, so rather than trying to, you know, take notes down about exactly what all these 7 are, the really good thing about it is that you can actually go and have a look at this in your own time with a video session that we did at Project Challenge. Plus there's access to those 7, like that nice little photo that you have there, access to a PDF there that you can have a look at that and have a study. But also I recommend having a look at a video session. It's about 30 minutes. It will give you an insights into how those PMO principles work in practice. So that's one thing that's really recent that we've been talking about. Another one that's quite recent is being innovative. And we absolutely marketed the heck out of this, because the whole idea of a PMO flash mob hackathon, I think, scared a lot of people. And to be fair, John McIntyre, PMO director at Ticketmaster, he was the one that came up with the idea. He's the one that really got behind it. And I know he was scared too. It's normally a thing that you see with technical teams, people coding, developing. You give them a scenario and they essentially come up with a prototype, some kind of quick and dirty coding in order to meet that particular situation or problem or challenge. So we thought, well, you know, PMOs are not known for being particularly inventive. Nobody automatically thinks, oh, PMO, very inventive group of people there. So straight away we knew that connotations were of hackathon meant doing lots of typing and coding, but also it felt it was a bit too maybe creative or innovative, a step too far from most PMOs. And so there's a very, the people that we talked to coming up to that event were very unsure about whether they should attend. But essentially, what it was about, we had at the beginning of the session, so we were basically a hackathon it started at 2 o'clock and ended at 8, so quite a long time to be working on something. And essentially the groups of people that turned up, there were 50 in all, actually had to think about, well, what is it, challenge-wise, a problem that they had that was all around and related to data and information and that kind of thing. So right at the beginning of the session, the ideas were thrown onto the board in terms of, we've got this particular problem, or actually we want to change this and that kind of thing. We also made it into a little bit of a competition because actually, you know, this is a bit about having fun as well, in terms of getting people together. So beginning of the day, picking the sessions that they thought were, yeah, you know, this is the kind of thing that I need to be doing right now, right in our business right now. And then they started to work in groups of 4 or 5 to start coming up with different ideas and different solutions in order to be able to meet that challenge. So for example, this, what you're seeing now, is from one particular group that didn't want to go down the route of getting into the information and data, and it's all about maybe spreadsheets or tools or all that kind of stuff. Actually, it was a step before that, which, as you can see there, is actually about getting the right information to senior execs and then them understanding it, is probably more of a behavioural challenge than something diving straight into solution. So these guys actually worked on this session, or want of a better word, for about 5 hours, and used, for example, the De Bono thinking hats to look at the problem from different angles. And then again, at the end of the sessions, is that each group actually presented back to everybody else so they could see what kind of stuff they were working on. One of the group here decided to do something that were more hands-on and more a case of, you know, getting onto the laptop and actually starting to pull together some stuff. And this particular one you're looking at, the challenge area was about being able to make dependencies more visible. And they managed to come up with a tool that they were using on an iPad that essentially was interactive. You were able to push the buttons and it were able to show you exactly where dependencies were happening between parts of the project or the program or the portfolio. So again, it was just something quick and dirty. It was more about being able to be in that circle of people and to really have that time to actually really think about a problem and go through that problem solving exercise. I mean, we were thinking on the day that it's not often you get to do this kind of learning experience, because you go on a training course, you know what training courses are like, you go on a workshop, it could be quite small, but again, it's often instructor-led. And this kind of learning experience was about, I suppose, like a flash mob plus. Normally we only do sessions in an evening for a couple of hours, so being able to get into something allowed them to really have that time away from work and to actually really think about the problem. So before we move on to that one, and to the third one, the other thing that was really nice about it is that actually people really enjoyed that opportunity to try something and to be more creative with their thinking as well, which again is good, is great in fact, and hopefully we'll be doing more of those in the coming year. Okay, third one that we've been talking about is centre leaders. Now we had a session in probably September, thinking about PMO leadership, and this particular piece of what you're seeing in front of you comes from Duke University. And it formed part of this session, and this is the one that people thought was, it caught my imagination. I quite like the sound of this, in terms of, if you imagine that what you're looking at here is the organisation. You've got your senior execs at the top, and at the bottom you've got your frontline doers, which is your project and programme managers and your project teams, and then you've got these people in the middle. Now if we're thinking about a good kind of like portfolio view of the world, well, we've got senior leadership, the architects of strategy, and then we've got the translators, i.e. the portfolio office, in the middle, and then the projects and programs popping out at the bottom. So that's initially when we've started to see this, that is what popped out in terms of, okay, so we can see that leadership from a PMO point of view, being able to lead from the centre, is actually quite it's an interesting angle. It's something to think about, but it also, in terms of the session that we were running, was to get people to think about, well, if you're leading from the centre, what does that mean in terms of skills, capabilities, behaviours, things like that, that you will potentially need to think about or develop in order to lead effectively from the middle. So for example, you've got a lot of people in the room, but are not necessarily at that portfolio level. So we're not actually doing this kind of, and maybe enterprise type PMO. But for people that are, and we're hearing a lot of, and people talking about this a lot, is going through a change in their PMO and moving more towards that portfolio thinking, that portfolio view of the world. So for this, it's about, and like a lot of the flash mob sessions, is about being able to put stuff there that makes people really think about what it is that they're doing, how they're positioned. And the next bit that was also shared that night is this thing here, which is a strategic execution framework, which comes from Stanford University. And one of the things here is, this is the whole organization. And if you see straight in the middle around engagement is where a lot of people are actually working or operating now. So we're in the kind of strategy, portfolio, program, project type area. But what the strategic execution framework got a lot of people thinking about is that bigger picture, that bigger part of where you are within that organization. They also shared that evening about some of the weaknesses that many organizations have, and they use the tool in order to be able to talk to maybe senior executives about where they think their strengths are in terms of their organisation and where their weaknesses are. And it was interesting when they put up some slides and showed that actually genuinely, a lot of organisations are quite strong on the ideation bit, the purpose of the organisation, what it's there to do. Most people have a fairly strong feel and knowledge about what it is that organisation is there to do, and what products or services it's offering a market or whatever. Where it started to show weaknesses was more towards this strategy to portfolio, but also there on the right hand side, the metrics part, in terms of actually, are we doing what we said we were going to be doing? So again, it's not something that PMOs are not, are pretty familiar with, is this whole world around metrics and measurement and reporting and all that kind of stuff. So probably come as no surprise that metrics tends to be a weakness. But again, this was presented as a tool that actually the centre leader, because I'm coming back to that previous slide, that the centre leader can use in order to be able to understand the bigger the bigger picture, both to that senior level architect, but also going and looking at the doer levels as well, in terms of what are people thinking about and what do they see the strengths or the problems or the weaknesses within the organization. Or should we not call it weaknesses, we call it opportunities, because where there's a weakness, there's obviously an opportunity to make that better. So again, the conversations around the whole PMO leadership thing was quite interesting. Perhaps not the angle that most people thought that it might go at, but again, it's thrown something else in to the big PMO bubbling pot of stuff that we're, that we're genuinely interested in. This is another one that we see quite a lot in terms of people talking about maturity, and often we're quick to like, well, maturity of what? Because generally most people are when we start to talk to them about PMO maturity, actually most of the conversations seem to be about the maturity of the organization, and these two things here that you'll probably you see and probably recognize as coming from the bigger piece, especially here in the UK, is the P3M3 maturity model. Whereas, for a lot of other people around the world, PMI have a similar type of maturity model as well. But this is genuinely what people are talking about when they talk about PMO maturity, not maturity about the PMO, but more about the maturity of the organization in terms of its project and program management capability and all that kind of good stuff. So it's about, so this is going back again, earlier on in the year, we thought it'd be quite good to have a session that looked at the PMO maturity. So that's maturity of the PMO. So how well the PMO is developing in terms of its services and functions that it offers. How well does it do the job that it's supposed to do? And the only thing that exists really today, and some of you may have seen this before, is the PMO Maturity Cube, which now is quite old and has been kind of abandoned. It's not really been developed ever since. But you can see there, again, I said to you, there's probably signposted in this session. We've got some outputs from that evening where we talked about Maturity Cube, and you can see this diagram better. Plus there's also a questionnaire that you can look at as well. Now the Maturity Cube comes from a gentleman called Americo Pinto, and we're going to talk about Americo a little bit later on about some of the other stuff we've been talking about recently. But Americo did this as part of a PhD piece of work, I do believe, with Monique Aubrey, who's also another leading researcher in PMO. And this is the only thing really that we have at the moment. However, the eggheads, so there's the researcher there on the left-hand side. We do know that a lot of people are starting to do more work on this. So we're hoping to see something, in the coming months, years, about the actual maturity of the PMO. But like I said, I've got something else to add to that later on. But again, you can see that on that session on the website, and the website is pmoflashmob.org. Let's move on. So this is another recent one, and this got kicked off basically by June this year again. I say again because this is all about Mark Price Perry. We, PMO Flashmob in its previous kind of life form was called a PMO SIG, and we used to run some conferences in the UK, and we got Mark Price Perry over from the US. This is probably going back to about 2009, 2010. And Mark had just brought out a new book called A Business Driven PMO. And I think most people in PMO have probably heard of the book, or if not him, because he also does something called the PMO podcast. So if you're not familiar with that, you can go and have a look at that too. But the book is well received because it was about being able to switch our thinking in terms of the success of a PMO within a business. And we brought him over to the UK, and he talked about the business-driven PMO principles, and we can see that book. I think it's published in about 2009. And essentially what he's saying is that the success of a PMO has to come from the fact that the business is stating what it wants from a PMO. Now, what he's saying here is that there's a couple of steps that absolutely must take place. And if you've been on the PMO Flash Mob distribution list this week, you will have seen the recent post that we put out, Business Driven PMO, and I share a small bit of his opening keynote speech in June this year in London, where Mark talks a little bit more and brings up the, his more thinking around the business driven PMO. So if you've not seen that, you can. And I'm going to share with you a URL so you can go and have a look at the full session shortly. But essentially what he's saying is that it's a leadership team, it's the senior executives that actually have to state what it is that they want from a PMO. So a PMO mandate has to be put together by your senior leadership team. And then the second stage from that is that the PMO manager then starts to develop a business plan, starts to think together like how we're going to achieve the things that are needed within the PMO mandate. Sounds pretty straightforward, but this is the kind of thing that he's talking about, but the PMO mandate doesn't have to actually be that complicated. It's just needing to know, and you'll see the word up there, the namawashi, is about having consensus amongst all your senior executives in order to get a unanimous consensus. So actually it's advocating the work of individual one-to-one conversations with senior leadership team members in order to then be able to get them around the table to agree the consensus of what are the top 3 problems, what is the vision and mission, and so on. So again, sometimes we think this stuff's quite simple, but if you want to have a look at the whole thing, it's got some great tips and insights in there. You can just take a quick note of that URL right now, and you can go and have a look at that, our keynote session from June from London this year. Okay, hopefully you managed to write that down. If not, you know my email address. It's lindsay@pmoflashmob.org. Drop me a line, okay? Coming back to Americo Pinto, value ring seems to have kind of landed on these shores earlier on this year. And the value ring is a methodology for setting up and running a PMO. 8 steps, and essentially this is the work that Americo Pinto did, carrying on from the Maturity Cube that you've just seen. So he's been working away on this methodology, and behind this methodology is a piece of software. Essentially what we like about it from PMO Flashmob's point of view, and we shared this some insights into it in Manchester a few weeks ago in a session about the value of the PMO, is that it links quite nicely with Mark's business-driven PMO, because it starts in a very similar place to where Mark's talking about. So step 1 is about finding the most appropriate functions for your PMO according to the needs of your stakeholder. So you can see how they dovetail in terms of this. Also, the value ring, the methodology for setting up a PMO, starts with trying to understand what is the true business need of a PMO from the people that ultimately are paying for it to be there, which is your senior executives. So essentially, these 8 steps, which takes you through being able to understand your stakeholders' needs, and then from that you're able to produce the functions that PMO should offer based on what the stakeholders are asking for. From that, then you can design your PMO processes, which again was an interesting concept for us, because it's how many PMOs, I wonder, we don't know this, but how many of them actually document their processes? It's an interesting question, and I'm sure we'll probably have a conversation about it at Flash Mob in the future. I'm intrigued to know who has a nice little, documentation of everything that they're doing. Number 4 was about being able to select some performance indicators and monitor how those services are actually delivering what the stakeholders need. Then there's a small piece in there about evaluating the team. So it's almost like a self-assessment, an assessment of the capability which again is not something I put on these slides today, but one of the things that I think many people know that PMO Flashmob are currently working on a competency framework model at the moment. And we're hoping, so that's number 5, is essentially that kind of work that we're developing at the moment. So we have a team of people that are working on this project on the side to essentially come up with a good PMO competency-based framework in order so you can then assess yourself and so on. So that's number 5. Number 6, again, is about the maturity of the PMO, and this is where the maturity cube pops up again. So the principles from that maturity cube are being incorporated into number 6. Number 7 then moves on to what the financial return is of a PMO, which again is an interesting concept and would be quite, looking at it could be quite difficult to try and understand the financial return of a PMO, but there are some guidelines there. And then ultimately, because it's called the PMO value ring, is about how to define the value that the PMO is bringing to that organization, and being able to show that with, through a dashboard and what have you. So that's the overview of it. But if you just go into one part of it, which is right at the beginning, trying to understand what the stakeholders want from the PMO value ring essentially starts with, here from research, it's all based on academic research and stuff from the community. Okay, so which is I know is a bit woolly, but go with it. And essentially, these things that you're seeing on the screen right now are from the research about the possible benefits that a PMO can offer to stakeholders, senior execs, and so on. And the way that it works is that a stakeholder would be allowed to pick, say, the top 3, top 5 benefits that they want to see from their PMO. So you can see there just some of the, these are the benefits that have been pulled out. And what's interesting with the value ring is that you can't change that. It's there, it's those benefits, and that's it. So essentially, the tool that goes with it, which, by the way, go and have a look at it. You can set up a free account, but the cost of it is quite. When we've talked about it again, what PMOs are talking about, that was one of the comments that frequently seems to come up is the price of that software. But however, you can have a look at it, and make your own mind up about that. But you can actually just have a free account. So essentially what it does is that the stakeholders would pick which benefits. The tool then allows you to come to some consensus based on the probabilities and statistics of who's chosen what and who they are and how important they are and so on. And then the next stage is that the software then will tell you that these are the functions, also services and functions that your PMO should be offering in order to meet those benefits that have been popped out and said that these are your most important benefits. So, the thinking behind it sounds really good, but I think one of the things that we also were talking about in Manchester from some of the people in the room is actually that you could take the principle of how this works and use it within your own PMO, just the principle of how it moves through the 8 stages. It's definitely something to look at, something that we've been talking about. So you can have a look at the PMOvaluering.com, but we will cover it at some point, I think, in more detail, flash mob for people that are interested, in how it works and go into a bit more detail. But yeah, and by the way, we're not selling it or anything, so it's just purely a pointer for you to see that this is kind of stuff that's popped up in our world and we're sharing it with you. Okay. Right, so next one, if you go back to our challenges, Agile PMO is one of the things that frequently comes up. I know that some of the people that are listening today, it was one of yours as well, and it feels like we're on a bit of a journey. So we've gone over, so far. I think we started talking about this going back probably maybe 3 years ago, and started to understand the basic concepts of what Agile is. So we've done that, got the basic concepts. We've looked at things like you're seeing on the screen now, like what are the kind of artifacts involved with agile development, agile projects. You know, we need to be educated in that, and you know, what are people talking about when they're talking about Kanban boards, all of that kind of stuff. We kind of feel like we're okay with that, you know. So actually now the conversations are moving more into governance, really, because this particular slide that you're looking at here comes from the Agile Business Consortium. They were at the PMO conference in June, and it's good to see that they are also starting to think about this thing, which is, you know, it is the governance side of it. The bottom line is that when you're working within a PMO, you may have traditional waterfall projects, you may have a bit of agile projects going on, and you know, we need to understand how to be able to report on both of those. You know, at the end of the day, the senior management still wants to know what's going on, and just because agile is being delivered in a different way to waterfall, we need to grapple and get to grips with how do we do that reporting, for example, and how do we make sure that the controls and stuff is not too heavy. So there's still a lot of, I suppose it's like anything, I suppose it's maturity down a certain stream, and you know, it's, again, the agile thing in terms of the PMO world is trying to understand where it fits within the organization, because, you know, waterfall agile projects are not the only thing that are going on. You know, you've got a big portfolio of stuff that's happening. So how do we best grapple and get to grips with that way, you know, different way that people are working, and essentially our next session, which we're doing in Leeds at the end of November. We're getting now into, you know, you'll see there on the left-hand side about some of the stuff that's happening in that evening. It all starts to look familiar in terms of things like risk management, benefits management, trying to understand and evaluate the status of projects and things like that. It's almost like as a group of people or PMO professionals, it's like we're on a, you know, we've done the first stages of understanding what agile is, but actually now we need to be thinking about, you know, how does it all fit into the bigger picture and everything else that we're also doing and responsible for. So again, with Leeds, it'll be something that will be recorded, and hopefully you'll be able to see that. But no doubt this will continue to be something that we keep revisiting, and yeah, which is what it's all about. That's what Flash Mob's all about. What are the challenges that people have on their day-to-day work, and let's do something, try and understand and pick those challenges, and hopefully find a way forward or a solution, or, you know, help each other to basically understand how to deal with it. The other thing that's has popped up quite a bit, not just talking with the PMO a lot, but it's just going to quite a few conferences and stuff over the last couple of years. This has been one of the things that that a lot of people have been talking about, and I think I shared this diagram in the PMO Flash Mob LinkedIn group because I think it's fantastic. But I think it's kind of highlighting a couple of things for me, and the first one being that I don't think as a community of PMO people that we do a lot around the behavioral side of what it is that we do. And, you know, we talk about the technical challenges, you know, like how to put in place a governance structure, or, you know, how to do better reporting or whatever else. And I think actually because of this, sometimes a unique position that the PMO finds itself in. So for example, if we go back to that centre leadership type model, leading from the centre, often it's the behavioural side of the role that we can let ourselves down with, and the whole thing around buyers leads to conversations that are more about relationships and communication and the way that people are thinking and how to influence and how to deal with conflict and all of that kind of stuff. And I think it's quite a nice it's a nice way to talk about it because there's lots of interesting examples. So it's just there's some of them that I just pulled up, and I just thought, wow, this is you know, you can just see some of this in terms of the, you know, the PMO in where it sits and who it works with, and in sometimes being buyers itself. So this one here about overestimating the importance of information that's easiest to recall. I think there's probably quite a few project managers that are quite good at that. And the other one here about unskilled individuals overestimating their abilities and experts underestimating theirs. Again, I think we probably work with people. You think about the different types of people that we're working with every day. So there's effects and bias going on all over the place. And this one here, again, about drawing different conclusions from the same information presented differently. And I sometimes wonder, and this would be a great exercise to do within a PMO, would be to get all your PMO team members, present them with the same information, and just see what conclusions they all individually draw from one piece of project data, for example. It'd be quite an interesting little experiment. But I think it's an interesting one that most people they like it because it's something that draws on personal as well as professional life. And if you want to know more about the bias stuff, have a look at TED. They're always good for those kinds of short sessions, but obviously they deal with various different types of bias. So yeah. It's good. It's interesting stuff. Right, so we're on to number 9, and I've got quite a bit on this because we've had a couple of things happen over the year or so, and I keep seeing it popping up. And so I thought with this session, it'd be quite nice to just pull them both together and see what you think. And essentially what we're talking about here is going back to a masterclass that we did about facilitating learning, not lessons, because we hate the term lessons learned. And we say, well, actually, it's not lessons learned at all, it's lessons recorded. You know, so we get to the end of a project and, you know, we all have to get put in a meeting room and we have to go through this torturous exercise of trying to think about all the things that we've learned or not. And it just feels like such a charade. So actually we wanted to do something that was around lessons learned, but wasn't, because we couldn't call it that. So we called it this instead. And one of the really interesting things about this is straight away we asked the question, and this is what's extraordinary about PMO today, is do we have the right kind of facilitation skills to do this? Because often a PMO is the one that will run this session. So we asked the question, you know, do you have the right kind of facilitation skill? Do you have the experience? Do you have the training, whatever? Do you feel comfortable doing this kind of thing? So the session approach was about being able to try out some of those facilitation skills while actually going through a kind of lesson review, and this was just one approach that we used, which was is very simple. As about, you know, what approach did we take in the project and did we do it well, and it fits into these 4 boxes. So essentially, the team that night were thinking about a particular, they were given a particular type of scenario, and then had to think about where, you know, where would they appear on this thing, and this little thing alone just made me think, well, yeah, I've never really thought about it like that. But those are where the successes, the learnings are, and the watching areas. I mean, that's just one little tiny facilitation tip. Again, it just makes me think that actually, do we need to do more around facilitation skills, specifically around the PMO? So we did it around, like I say, from lessons learning, and shout out to Ken Burrell. He also ran part of this session. He's a regular flash mobber, and Ken's got a bee in his bonnet about learning. I say bee in a bonnet in a really positive way. It's his thing. He really enjoys learning more about it and where it's going and all that kind of stuff. So what you can see here is how learning takes place in projects. So we basically took this particular model where you can see that from every end of each project that you will be going through this kind of this flow. So you'll be thinking about the things that that have happened, so the experience-wise, reflecting back on that, capturing that, storing it, being able to retrieve it, and then actually how you apply that learning. So pretty straightforward. Right, let's go for it. So we thought, actually, what would be quite nice is to use another type of a facilitation tip, was to use, well, what would Ryanair do? So if we were thinking about this project that we've just done, let's not think about it from our perspective. Let's think about it from how Ryanair would do this. So actually, we've whole room was using different companies. So we had Ryanair, we had Disney, we had Marks and Spencer's, we had Apple, we had Google, and it's about, well, what would they have done? So how would they reflect back? How would they capture stuff? How would they store things? Just to get people to think out of the box a bit. So again, it comes back to this whole PMO, creative thinking, being a bit innovative. I think if you give people the right kind of tools and approaches, they generally will grab them and use them. So this one here is from thinking about it from a Marks and Spencer's point of view. So you have these concepts and ideas about what companies are like and how they might do stuff. So essentially, the groups were able to come out with, well, if it were Marks and Spencer's, you get things in terms of potentially, high quality, or, one here about they would actually use their many staff to be able to trial new stuff. They might be good to adjust tactics, but their strategists probably feel like it would be a bit slower. So you're just thinking about the particular project that you manage, but just doing it with a different hat on, a different viewpoint. And again, the groups like that because it was something that they'd never done before. Excuse me, a lot of talking going on. Right, so second part then is coming back to the hackathon. This group that you're looking at here on the hackathon decided to look at lessons learned, okay? And they wanted to think about how we can stop it being about just lessons recorded. So essentially that night, they wanted to look at how do we move this whole lessons learned thing on a bit, make it more of a, that people don't groan and grumble when it comes to that part of the project. So they thought about what their problems were, which I've not shared that with you, you can probably guess. But through their 4 hours of hacking, this is the kind of stuff that they came out with. I'm going to make an apology on their behalf. As we go through this, there's quite a lot of references to drinks and stuff, but that's probably just because of the whole atmosphere of hackathon that night. Anyway, elements of the solution. So this is the kind of stuff that they were thinking about. So just thinking about lessons learned, about the different aspects that we'll need to think about in terms of being able to, what can we change going forward. So for example, we know there's a lot of behavioural and cultural stuff around this. So actually, let's stop calling them lessons learned and let's nix stuff from Agile, which is retrospective, because the retrospective has a certain way of running a retrospective. Again, it's something that's become part of modern parley, but also it's something that that any PMO person could pick up, read about a retrospective, read about an approach to a retrospective, and probably be able to run one of those quite simply. They also did things like thinking about stuff like gamification. They thought about doing stuff like getting people together in kind of like a flash mob style incentives and being able to show the true value about what it is that pops out of doing this kind of stuff. But I think that's one of the main complaints that many people have, is that you do a lessons learned, the stuff that comes out of it could present an opportunity, but nothing ever seems to come of it. They also talked about being able to think about how we store and retrieve this stuff. There must be, many of us that have this stuff in a database, or but doesn't really get used. It just sits there. And one of the things that they came up with, and again, this is all within 4 hours, that they just put stuff together, just hacked it, and just said, we'd have some kind of something that's a bit more two-way, interactive. We are in the 21st century now. Where can we go with this kind of stuff? They also thought about, well, actually, we need to be thinking about different types of technology we have. It's why are we not doing this kind of lessons learned to screen on video? That here's a particular lesson about a particular project, and here's my 2-minute piece about it, and if you want to talk to me about that, here's my contact details and you can get back to me. It's just being able to just think differently about how we can stop people being reluctant to get involved. And I think the most important bit as well was about being able to show that there's a point to this, but actually it's not just about a project manager starting a new project, going back, looking through the lessons learned database to see if there's anything that's relevant, not really seeing very much, and then carrying on with their project anyway. I mean, that's it's just too hold out, it's too boring, people don't do it. And actually one of the things was also from a PMO point of view is when these things come out, when these lessons come out that things need changing, why aren't the PMO changing them? Because nobody else is going to do it other than the PMO. And then as part of that, and taking ownership for stuff, is how you're then able to show and demonstrate that there's actually a point to this. And the point is it saves X amount, it does this, that, and the other. So, you know, there's still stuff obviously to do, but that's the whole point of the flash mob, is say, look, we've got an issue with stuff. Can we not just get all together? I'm sure we could work it out if we could just get together and have a chat about it. So that's you know, again, was the whole point of this particular exercise. Okay, so we're coming up to the final one. And the resource management stuff is still one of the biggest challenges that people have. When we do things like Project Challenge, we always have a piece of paper at the back of the stand and we write on it, what's your top challenge today? And resource management is always there, always. And in different incarnations as well. So for example, just casting my mind back to Project Challenge this year, there's a couple in terms of resource management at portfolio level, resource management in terms of capability. So some of the project managers, their skill levels needed to be improved. Project management is new to the organisation. We need to get better at it. So it's all around things like training, development, that kind of stuff. And then, you know, you have people, just basic people new to PMO. You know, I'm being asked to get involved in resource tracking. I've got no idea what I'm doing. So just various levels of resource management stuff. So we had a PMO manager's lunch, which is all about being able to get 12 project PMO managers around the table. You give them a topic area. In this case, it was resource management. And essentially, we asked the group questions all the way through 3-hour lunch. And the idea is that we want to know, what are people really doing? So we're finding people that think that they're doing a good job at something, that we think we've got something cracked, or we're doing pretty well. And we want to know, we want to unpick, they want to pick their brains and find out, well, what is it that you're actually really doing? You know, we can't get this stuff out of textbooks. So we want to be able to get those people around the table and find out exactly what's going on. So the resource management bit was all about, and what came out of that was that it was a circle, which is why you're seeing circles now on the screen. And we managed to get to this thing in that there's 3 parts to it. There's project-related resource management, there's portfolio management, resource management, and then there's something that we call resource, which is about more of a people aspects to it. So what you're seeing there is these broken down underneath each one of those is what we're talking about, or what constitutes project, portfolio, and resource in terms of resource management. Now, what we're saying in terms of resource management is that you can start anywhere. You can start at any one of these points. So if you're asked to get involved in resource management for the first time, or to improve it, or to add new bits or whatever, it doesn't matter. You don't have to have things in place in order to be able to do resource management. So you don't need to have cracked project resource level project management, you know, while you're thinking about actually developing people. It doesn't need to happen. It's not, you know, something that relies on each other. So it doesn't matter where you start. And it's saying effective resource management at organizational level requires one or more component from each segment. So in order to be able to do resource management and to perceive for it to be doing well within your organization, you should be doing at least one of these things from each of these areas. And what the bit on the outside is saying is that actually it's context and culture that has a big bearing on being able to do resource management. And we say to do resource management will look different in obviously different types of organizations because of the context and the culture. Now, it's not the full story, But what we wanted to do was actually try to understand, well, what are people really doing on the ground, rather than, just reading textbooks of how to do resource management, because these people have been doing it for years. So you can actually see that what we do after each PMO manager's lunch is create a report from each lunch and share it with you. And you'll be able to see there on the website, go and have a look. There's 2 there at the moment. Resource management was the last one, but you might also be interested in that one before, which was a portfolio management one. And that had a tagline of about how most people seem to be doing portfolio reporting, not portfolio management. So again, this is about people that are doing the job and doing it well and sharing with you the realities of how it works and what they've done and what they've come up against and that kind of stuff. And for anybody who's listening now, it's our next PMO Managers Lunch is on the 17th of November. We're trying to do something around Agile PMO. So that's for people that think they've been doing well in supporting Agile PMO, Agile projects or business agility. So if you think that you've got something that you'd like to share because you've been doing it well, have a look at the website, 17th in November in London. We're doing the next one. And again, we'll be sharing those findings with other people, with all of you on the community. Now, just a thing while you're looking at this, at the website, is you'll see that everything that we do in Flashmob is available for you to look at. So it doesn't matter where in the world you are, whether you can get to events or not, we record everything. So you'll see under the mini masterclasses, there's got previous recordings of sessions, evening sessions that we've done. And the PMO mob yield, and the yield is what's come out of the sessions. There's lots of articles, lots of things like I'm sharing with you today, what are coming out of the sessions that we're running. So it's about what do we learn at Flashmob, doesn't stay with Flashmob, it goes right out there, and we share it all over the place. So if you're not already signed up for it, you'll see there on the right hand side, you can just sign up and you'll receive stuff. Some of them will be about events that you can't make, but hopefully you can at some point. But if not, you'll get access to other materials that are happening. So that, and I'm pleased to say, Wellbeing Time is the end of our International PM/PMO Day, and these are the top 10 things that PMOs are talking about right now. And hopefully next year we can come back and do it again in November, and we'll just see just how different it is in terms of what kind of conversations we're having. And thank you very much for your time. And if you want to sign up, there's a website. Okay, take care. Thank you.